Hello everyone and welcome to episode number 27 of the Creative Out Podcast. I'm your host Brandon Pudwell, and today is July 20th, 2023, and folks, I am back from my latest bit of travel. The only other bit of major, longer-term travel that I had planned for the year. My travel into the mountains of the United States state of Colorado. And that is, in fact, going to be a topic of today's episode. So don't worry, I'll get to talking about it. It's just not happening right at this second. I consider that topic, once we get to it shortly, to be sort of like going through those... I don't think people really do this anymore in this way, but I've always seen on TV these scenes where characters are going through vacation photos with a projector. Think of this sort of like that, I guess. Only hopefully much more entertaining, because they kind of frame those in TV as always super boring. I'm going to try to make this entertaining, or at least as best as I can. Also, for the video folks, speaking of visuals and how boring that those would be because they're only pictures, I have plenty of footage of these events. I have videos for you to see, and if any of the video seems kind of weird as far as how it's cut or maybe some of the angles, it is for two reasons. And number one, the top reason for that, I tried generally recording around people, since that is something that you are supposed to get permission to do, to have certain people in your video. In fact, I'm fairly certain that's a legal thing. It's not just like an ethical thing. I know it's generally a YouTube convention to just kind of like, I'm gonna film in public, and just whatever. If there are people in it, it is what it is. But I think it is a fair rule to have to get permission for that, because I know if I were filmed in public, I wouldn't really want that put online necessarily, but I guess I am likely in the minority on that. It is what it is. I also made the mistake. This is the other reason why I think the footage might look just a little off. I know it's probably not actually that big of a deal for most people, but I made the mistake of forgetting my camcorder here at home. It would have been the first time in a long time that I could have used it, but alas, I forgot to pack it up. So, because I wanted to use that to film, but, evidently I had to use my cell phone camera, which, it's better than nothing, but I know it's not the best camera type to use in general when it comes to filming, so that's how the video is going to be. Furthermore, I did tease this last time as far as topics today. I saw this article. I thought it was somewhere else. It turns out it's actually in Comic Book Resource, where the author argued that SEGA should re-enter the console market. And I'm going to take some time to respond to it today. But before we get into that, let's talk about some brief news. And I actually do have a little bit of breaking news, today. The one thing that kind of makes me glad that I did not have my notes fully prepared until today, Thursday the 20th, to record this, which is that the folks at Dolphin have released a new blog post that provides an update on the status of their Steam release. But we will be covering that in next week's episode, because I want to, like when I covered the debacle in, I think it was in episode 26, wasn't it? I wanna let things simmer down a little bit. I want to actually read through all of there's another Sean Hollister article on this, so I'll be primarily using that. But I'll also be looking at their actual blog post like last time, and in the end providing my 2 cents on it, which is kind of ironic because that's something they specifically brought up in their blog post, because I have given it some reading already, and I noticed that they're like, well, we've got all these armchair lawyers and pontificators online in blogs and on YouTube. I was like, well, I doubt that they specifically saw my recording on it, but I am one of the people on that, so I indirectly contributed to that. Well, no, I directly contributed to that list, but I doubt I was in mind when I contributed to that list. Hence, I say somewhat indirectly am a part of that list. So, it is what it is. I'm looking forward to covering that next time. It's just this episode is going to be long enough as is today without me adding that to the list of topics. And plus, it would mean pushing this back more, which would be a problem because the date that you should be listening to this on, which you won't be listening to this on because this is going to be a more involved video project specifically, and it's going to take time to make this. The planned date would be July 21st, 2023. It's probably not coming out that date, but I'm going to try to get it out sooner than Friday, if at all possible, sooner than the 28th. But tomorrow, July 21st, that is likely when I will be sitting at home marathoning Pikmin 4 since it comes out. I don't plan on reviewing the game, but unless something else really interesting comes out beyond just the Steam-Dolphin update, maybe I will provide some further impressions based on some things that I didn't get to cover in the demo because they weren't in there. I haven't decided yet, but right now I'm not planning on reviewing the game right now. But that'll probably be talked about next time as well, to some extent or another. I'm not certain yet. But more importantly, in this little brief news portion, something that just had to happen. It just had to happen while I had a few episodes planned out, right? I had a bonus. I had 2 episodes that were ready to go all in a row. And then something just had to release while I was on a trip, no less, with all these episodes planned out, which was Wave 5 of the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass, which also means I'm really never getting away from talking about this thing, so hopefully from right at this point, this is officially the cutoff until they announce Wave 6 in not anytime soon right now for me to be talking about this, okay? But anywho, last Wednesday, July 12th, I downloaded this new wave in the late evening, and so I took the tracks out for a spin. We already knew that Petey Piranha, Wiggler, and Kamek were coming as new characters. I also tried them out. I have opinions on them as well. But again, I'm going to be saving that for when Wave 6 comes out and reviewing them much like I did with Waves 1 through 4, covering 2 in an episode. We also knew about the new track Squeaky Clean Sprint before the additional tracks. The other 7 in that wave were announced, but of course now we know them. In my case, I've played them a whole bunch. In the Feather Cup, we have Athens Dash from Mario Kart Tour, Daisy Cruiser from Mario Kart Double Dash, Moonview Highway from Mario Kart Wii, and then the final slot in that cup went to Squeaky Clean Sprint. While the Cherry Cup has Los Angeles Laps, also from Mario Kart Tour, Sunset Wilds from Shocker, did you know they put in a Mario Kart Super Circuit track? I would not have guessed that. Then was Koopa Cape from Mario Kart Wii, and the Cherry Cup ends off with Vancouver Velocity, which, yes, is another Mario Kart Tour track. And so I'll be giving my full review of these individual tracks later once the final wave releases. But one thing I can say for sure, I like this wave overall a lot more than I did Wave 4, or at the very least, I like it a lot. I liked it a lot more out of the gate. Remember, I said when Wave 4 came out, my first impression was there's like, I mean, like, it's okay, they're not, I don't think they're as great as people thought that they were. Like, everybody seemed super excited about it. I really wasn't into it, but over time, I grew more and more to like the tracks. Whereas with this wave, right out of the gate, I liked them a lot, which is seemingly a more controversial opinion I've noticed. I don't know. I'm sincerely not trying to be Mr. I'm just holding the opposite opinion from others, but right now that just seems to be the pattern. I don't know why this keeps happening. It just is what it is at this point. But hopefully in the future that does not continue, because I'd like to be on the same page as other people with some stuff. I do have my problems with each track, and we will get into them once it's time to complete the tier list in full and make adjustments, because I'm sure there will be some adjustments to the earlier tracks now that I have once I have all 6 waves available to me. But on the whole, I was really pleased with this wave. So, with that all said, with this short 10-minute intro for a change, let's get right in to the main topics, which starts off with my first time in the mountains, because on Friday, July 7th, I flew out to Denver, Colorado. Now, I do know there is an airport in this area. And it did save me quite a bit of money, driving to not go to where my real destination was, which was the Colorado Springs area, which is where I spent my time. So, it's kind of a trade-off. Like, do I want to save myself time? Do I want to save my dad time? I decided I want to save myself time. So I ended up leaving from where I am generally right now, which allowed me just to go to Denver and not Springs. And during this trip, I saw all kinds of things that I hadn't seen before, given that I had never gone out to this part of the country. And in fact, I don't know if this is a sad fact or if it's a fun fact or how you want to look at it, but this trip to Colorado now makes that state the furthest west I've been in the United States of America. Prior, that title would have gone to Minnesota. You could argue Texas, but I think there is some controversy as far as whether people consider you've been to a state by simply stepping foot in it, or in order to have been to a state, you need to be somewhere within the state that is not an airport. And I think that's probably a fair standard, that you need to have actually done stuff. So I'm going to say Minnesota was previously the furthest west I've been. It is now the state of Colorado. I'd seen a volcano live and in person, though thankfully it wasn't active. I can't imagine it is active now. I would assume I would have heard about it, but it was certainly inactive when I was on my service learning trip in Costa Rica in 2017. But until that Friday, I had never seen Pikes Peak, a mountain that is not a volcano in person, for sure. And in fact, that should largely be what video folks are seeing right now, is the video footage of some of those places. They're for sure on my second day there overall, which, really you could argue is my first day, because, I did get there early in the afternoon on Friday, but that was mostly a day of, hey, let's go home. In fact, I will be addressing this shortly when I talk about here, the things I'm going to be discussing here. But that first, Saturday is where I had most of my driving, just showing off, oh, here's general places and what they look like. Here are mountains, right? But for now, I want to actually start getting into the things that I did out there. On that Friday, the following Sunday, and the following Thursday, we didn't go out and do much of anything of note, because after all, I had to get home on Friday. On Sunday, my family, which for me, in this case, was myself, my father, and my stepmother, did not have any plans for Sunday. And then both of them were working on Thursday. So those were the days that I was left to my own devices, pretty much, that I just didn't have a specific thing to do. But that Saturday was a pretty good thing that we did, except for one little aspect that I may mention at the end of these first 2 activities. I honestly haven't decided yet if I should really mention it or not. But on Saturday, we went to 2 places, the Royal Gorge Mountain Park and the Cripple Creek / Victor Narrow Gauge Railroad. And so we went to the mountain park first because it's a little closer than the railroad was. And as the name suggests, it is a park. It has a large gorge on it. Wow, I'm sure you couldn't figure that out from the name at all. And you can get across the gorge by walking across the Royal Gorge Bridge. And overall, I thought it was a pretty cool place. And I would be interested in going again. If I were to go again, I'd want to try out some more of the stuff, because when I was writing these notes, I realized, we really didn't do much of the activities there beyond walking around. Which, walking around, looking at the views, that's fine. That's probably really the main intent they have for you there. But they also had more activities beyond that as well. Looking down the gorge at the river with the whitewater rafters, that was pretty astonishing. The bridge itself was fairly neat. It was actually lined on both sides with flags for each U.S. state, so naturally I had to go find the Wisconsin flag, and I took a picture near it. like I said, we didn't partake in a ton of the activities, but the main one we did was riding across the gorge on the area gondolas. So, or aerial is the word I'm looking for. Aerial gondolas, because there's this pair of just cable cars that hang beside the bridge that can be used to ride back and forth from, I guess you could call it, the top of one mountain back to the visitor center. But the area in which I can freely admit my father and I were not particularly smart about doing this is that, we decided, let's walk to the top of the mountainside side where that set of cable cars leave, instead of leaving from the line that is at the visitor center at the very start. Granted, it got us a lot of exercise along the way, and the line to start on that side was a lot shorter than starting on the visitor center side, but, I'm just saying we were kind of tired by the time we were able to actually get on the gondola. But that was fun, right? It was really interesting going in this cable car over a giant drop right below us, right? There were also a handful of food vendors at the park, and we did have some tasty barbecue at the one stand that was there. But like I said, when I look back at the list of things to do there, I do kind of wish I had done some more, but that is always what going back is for, okay? I didn't get to do the zip lining. I probably wouldn't want to do the zip lining because that sounds kind of scary. But I guess I did go on the gondola, which the zip lining is directly next to the gondola, so can it be really that much more scary? But that could be something to do. There was this thing that they call, like, the Superman, I want to say it was, the Sky Coaster. But essentially it's like you almost, like, get strapped into a vest and you get to fly back and forth in a Superman-esque fashion, which I would be more interested in doing something like that here, where there's not a giant gorge right below me, where if something went wrong, I could, drop into the gorge and probably kill myself. But I'm sure they tested for these things, but I can't act like that prospect isn't scary, right? But like I said, more times I'm going to definitely be going out to this state in the future, as far as I'm aware. So, just because I didn't do it this time doesn't mean I won't do it next time. And then our next stop on that day was to the unfortunately named, though appropriately named for the time, and it's got a story by it, the town of Cripple Creek. And that town is apparently famous, or at least it is famous right now, for its casinos, because I tell you, they had quite a few casinos on just the main strip. But the reason I wanted to stop there was to take a ride on the Cripple Creek and Victor, which is Victor's just another town. I don't know why it's got both names on there when it's in Cripple Creek, but whatever. It is their narrow gauge railroad. And if you know anything about railroads, the naming of it being narrow gauge, that just comes from the fact that the tracks, the metal that the wheels go on, they're closer to each other than on other types of tracks. In other words, they have a narrower gauge. And an old school, it's about 100-year-old steam train is what took us and many other passengers on a 45-minute ride through some of the local scenery, with stops along the way to talk about some of the historic mining operations along the way. And, we saw all kinds of remnants from the mines of about 150 years ago, as well as, say, the man-made mountain that is where the current mining operation in that area takes place. And, I enjoyed the tour quite a bit. Like I said, it was a very pretty little view. There were some fun historical facts, but at the same time, it's also like, as interesting as it was learning about Cripple Creek's mining history, given that I'm on a narrow gauge railroad tour, I feel like I would rather learn more about its rail history, if anything. I'm just saying, railroad tour kind of seems like rail history goes more in line with that than mining. And plus, there were a lot of places in the Colorado Springs area where I could have learned about the state's mining history. And like I said, what I learned on the trip was interesting, but I suspect if you're going on this railroad trip, you probably want to learn about rail history. And there just was not that much of that on the ride. But to be fair, they could have just not talked anything on the ride. They could have just had it be a go around and you get to see the pretty views. So I guess learning some stuff along the way at all is something that's worthwhile. But to the extent that you're trying to teach people about stuff, I just think it's better to keep it in what you're doing, if that makes, yeah, I mean, I figure that makes sense, but I'm just saying railroad should be about rail history. But I digress from that point now. On to the name of the town. I already brought up here, it's like, I probably would not name a town in the year 2023, or at least keep it named Cripple Creek, because I think that could be seen as a little, not so great a name anymore in 2023, but there is a reason for it. It got its name from a story, presumably a true story, but nowadays, I mean, it's just more of a, like, story, but I would guess it's true. Maybe it's just a folk tale now. But it's about a rancher who had a cattle of his break its leg in the creek. The creek that is sadly no longer really in the town. It's pretty dried up to the extent that there is anything there whatsoever. And then the son of the rancher went in to try to retrieve the cattle and also broke his leg. So supposedly the rancher then said something to the effect that, man, this place has one Cripple Creek, and so the name stuck, and hence the town got that name. And the railroad is actually one of the few places that I purchased a souvenir. I did get a mug that now sits in my freezer for some ice cold water when I get done exercising, and it just has a map on the ride, or a map of the ride on it. So that was a pretty neat little place there. I had fun. There was definitely some other stuff in the gift shop I would wanted to get. And like I said, a lot of pretty views, and it was nice seeing, like, the town from far away. It was nice seeing, like, the little entryways into different mines from back in the day. But I just wanted to learn. I want to learn more about railroad stuff, not so much mining stuff. If I wanted to learn about mining stuff, I would have gone to a mining museum. But it is what it is. I don't know for sure if I would necessarily want to do the ride again, because I can't imagine the ride is going to change a lot by the time I go there again. But I had a fun time. It's definitely the sort of place where, if/when I were to become a parent, then I would more than likely want to go there again, because I feel like that's something that children especially would enjoy. It's just fun to go on an old form of transportation that isn't used anymore regularly. There's not a lot of steam trains being used for regular trips anymore. The following day, or no, not the following day, 2 days later, on Monday, we went to two more places. We went to the North Cheyenne Canyon, and I say canyon instead of canyon because they had a lot of places out there where they spelled canyon using the ñ in Spanish, so it is the Canyon Park. And then we also went to the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo, and this is the day where the most of our plans changed. And to be fair, a lot of the plans overall changed out of the gate as far as, like, the order in which we did these activities. And in fact, there is one thing that we did that got added to the list, and that was on the last day that I'll be talking about, which was Wednesday. But originally, something that happened the following day. And the order in which my father and I did these two specific activities swapped too. We were going to do the zoo, or no, I think we were going to do the park on Tuesday. I can't remember which one, but we were going to do one of the two on Tuesday. But we decided to do these today since they're in the area, and we moved one of the other things to the following day. But actually, we first went over to the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo because we wanted to get that done first. We went there at around 11:30, and it was when we got there that we found out that to get in, apparently you are required, it is not an option, it is not preferable, it is mandatory to purchase advance tickets. You can't buy tickets at the gate and get in there, which that is something that I had never heard of a zoo doing until then. They had good reasons for it, I suppose, but, I can't act like it wasn't frustrating to drive over to the zoo and get there and immediately be told, hey, you needed to buy tickets before you got here. But, that I guess that is what it is. I didn't look at the zoo website, so I would not have known that. I just knew I wanted to go to the zoo, and I thought it would be a fair assumption that you could get tickets upon walking in there, or walking up to the booth, but I guess not. All I can say for sure is I know the Milwaukee County Zoo doesn't do that, but apparently the Cheyenne Mountain Park Zoo does. And, given that this was the what we couldn't do first, we then had to move on over to the Cheyenne Canyon Park instead. And so we walked a couple of the trails there, and walking those trails, it was fine. There were some nice mountainous views, but the places that I liked the most were the couple of small flows of water that we saw. I think mountains are fine. I'm not a big rock person, let alone a big rock person. But I do find bodies of water especially pretty looking. So seeing the little bits of creek that we saw, that was pretty nice. And then we did get to what seemed to be the end of a trail. I'm not really sure if we could have kept on going further, but it seemed like a nice place that you could call the end of the trail. Because at the like end, I guess, of it, to the extent you can again call it an end, if you were allowed there, it would have gotten a lot steeper, and then beside it seemed to be like a cave in the mountain that was gated up. So I don't know, it just seemed like it'd be kind of hard to progress further, so we just decided to pretty much call it at the end. I will admit it also helped that by the time we got to there, it had started raining, and so we made our way back to the car as best as possible. But just one long and winding trip back down that path, though. We got back to the car. We fortunately weren't rained on too badly, but there was actually a little bit of sand blowing around as well. But like I said, not too bad. And then we took another long and winding trip back down the mountain. And by the way, some of these side mountain roads out there are crazy. That is not a place that I filmed going down, but it's like, it's a 1-lane road of traffic going each way. It's just your standard American road that's separated by the 2 yellow lines, where you got one car going one way and one going the other way. But it's like, these are narrow and on the side of a mountain, and some of them barely have something on the side to try and catch cars. And it's just like, geez, like I don't understand how people drive around there. It's not something I would say I'm super comfortable with, but I'm not the person who lives out there, so I don't have to worry about it. But man, that's there were definitely some moments where it's like, this is narrow, I don't like this. But we got down it just fine. There didn't end up being any problems. We did have some time to kill in between that little, I guess, pretty much pit stop, you could describe it, at the Canyon Park. But eventually we did make our way back to the zoo, now with tickets officially in tow. And, I'm not sure if it was here or the main place we went on Wednesday where I got the most footage, but I tell you, this zoo was pretty big. My dad and I seem to disagree on if the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo and the Milwaukee County Zoo is bigger. He's probably right that Milwaukee's is larger, but I don't know. I've been to both. To me, this one seemed a lot more spread out, whereas I think Milwaukee's densely packed. So, like, Milwaukee's probably larger in that it has more stuff, but I don't think it's as spread out. I don't think you walk around as much, but it's also been, 4 years since I've been there, so I could very well be wrong on that. Maybe it's a good reason for me to go back there. Like I said, I haven't been in a while, but that's a story. That's a potential for another time. And they seemingly separated the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo into different continents, and I think when you look at the map, it's kind of confusing because outside of one area of the zoo, you can pretty much make a circle around, but I don't think the map really makes it look that way. You do have to backtrack from some areas to get back onto the main path where the circle would continue, but like I said, it's pretty much you can circle around the entire way, but it's just kind of tough to visualize how you do that. Either way, when we got there, we started off by going to the right, and that was where we explored the first of the few Africa sections where you could feed the giraffes. We did not feed them, but we did see all kinds of people doing so, and the giraffes like to get right up close and personal, trying to get the lettuce that people paid for. So that was pretty entertaining seeing people kind of get like, oh, that giraffe's getting real close to me. I mean, they had a wall between them. There's only really that their head could get right up to them, but that was pretty fun seeing. And there did seem to be a big focus on that because A lot of the zoo goodies at the gift shop was giraffe focused, and I tell you, between the outdoor area where people were feeding giraffes and then an indoor area where there were probably like, I want to say there were like a dozen giraffes or so there. So apparently giraffes are the big thing. I've kind of noticed that at other zoos too, because one of the souvenirs, which I don't think is a super big surprise for me, that I got when I last went to the Milwaukee County Zoo was a glass, and it is a giraffe glass. So I guess giraffes are like the big zoo thing. I would have thought it was lions. Maybe I just think of lions first, but I guess it's giraffes. And you know, speaking of lions, by the time we did get there, I wouldn't say the lions were especially active. There was a pair that laid atop a rock in their pen. And, you know, the zebras weren't even that active either. They just kind of seemed like they were standing around. But I tell you, the elephants, they were chomping and just chomping away on whatever grass they could find. You know, they weren't doing a lot of running around either. But if you wanted to see some, you know, elephants eating just an absolute ton of grass, or I guess maybe it could be straw, I got plenty of footage of an elephant, you know, just chomping away. Admittedly, I will say the next couple of sections weren't as exciting. They did have a small Australia section, which I think the neatest part of that is they did allow the wallabies to just kind of roam around, though they seemed like they were more posing for pictures and videos more than they were walking around at the time. But they did move around a little bit. There were these little shell ducks that were in their little pen, and there's an alligator pen as well, where the alligators were lounging about. But one of the areas I didn't get much footage in were the indoor areas. This isn't just in the Australia section, but the Australia section is where we had the first like major indoor area where they had like lizards and geckos and snakes and all that stuff, frogs as well. There's a lot of glare from the natural light coming in through skylights on like the glasses of each enclosure, so I was like, I can't really get that much good stuff in there. I did get one video, I suppose I'd probably be showing it right now, of this little lizard or gecko guy, but that was about the only one that I was like, that I decided to get. But I will say, by far, the most disappointing section of the zoo, because it was so small, was what they called the Asian Highlands. And that's because it had a grand total of 4 species to that entire area. And all of them were wildcats. And, I'm certainly not saying that, like, seeing a tiger isn't cool, aside from the fact that it, too, was taking a nap, but it's not really its fault. We just came when it was nap time for the tiger, I guess. But if you're going to have a whole section dedicated to Asian animals, you gotta have more than 4 species in there, right? And also, I mean, you gotta have, the variety has to be a little more than just, here's a tiger and a snow leopard and a Pallas cat. So if I were somebody at the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo, I would be heavily lobbying that the next section we gotta expand is the Asian Highlands, because we gotta get some more stuff in here than just what we have. I mean, they didn't even have any panda bears, which I feel like are really important to have in your Asia section, because they're a fairly iconic animal from that continent. But it is what it is. There were some areas that were dedicated to different types of American animals, but even those did have some tougher animals to see. Fortunately, the one cat that was pretty active was in this sort of American dedicated section, and those were the mountain lions. They were prowling around their enclosure pretty good, so I guess they weren't especially tired. A lot of the smaller North American animals were, again, inside of a building for the most part. We're talking like chinchillas. They actually had a little area of wild guinea pigs as well, although that might have been in a later section. I don't think that was in the American section, but like I said, I know there were chinchillas. I know they had more snakes, more lizards that were more America-centric. They had a skunk. The skunk was in the building that was sort of in the America-ish-y area. As far as outside stuff, there were grizzly bears, But the one that we saw decided to just kind of sit in the corner, so I couldn't really get good footage of it. Plus, that was a really crowded section, so trying to fulfill my goal of not really getting people in there would have been a lot tougher. But, it is what it is. But the last couple of sections, those were pretty neat as well. And I do have to say, the last only really disappointing area was probably the primate section. But I think that was just on the day that we went again, because we couldn't really find most of the primates. It seemed like a lot of them just wanted to hide that day. We saw some orangutans, but even they, after they were seen for a little bit, seemed like they wanted to hide away. There were some gorillas, but they weren't really doing all that much. But a lot of the other sorts of primate types just seemed like they were MIA for whatever reason. So I'm not sure what was going on there, but I'm sure if I go again in the future, I'm more likely to see oh, hey, look, there are those animals that I didn't see last time actually being active and doing stuff. But it is what it is. But the Water's Edge Africa section they had, which is what leads toward the primate building, I thought that section was pretty good. I thought it had some pretty good stuff. I'm not a huge penguin person, but seeing him in the flesh, or I suppose more appropriately in the feather, it's always really neat. I think penguins are cool. They're not my favorite animal, but I know some people are really, really into those cute little birds, so I got to see a whole bunch of them standing up on some rocks inside a little building with their I guess you could call it an aquarium, I guess. It's not really an aquarium in the traditional sense, but it also kind of is. Then there was another adjacent building that it wasn't so great on our first go around, but you do have to go back through it after you go through the primate section in order to, leave if you either want to go back to the other sections or if you're ready to go home like we were, since that was the last area we went to during the day. And it was much more active after we went through the primate building. Before going in, actually, the first time, we did get to see the ring-tailed lemurs, but going in the building, and then the second time, finally the hippos were actually out and eating a bunch, which made me pretty happy, because I'd say of the African animals, hippos are likely my favorite. There's also this fun scale in there that let you compare your weight to that of a hippo, and don't worry guys, fortunately I am much less, my weight is much less than that of a hippo, so phew, I don't weigh hippo weight. Although I will say, at least on that attraction, there were a lot of people that could mess up the measurements, because it's just it's part of the floor in the main hallway. And so you just have people walking on the scale without realizing that it was an attraction. So, you kind of had to get lucky and hope that people were walking around it. But I did get to try it out, and that was pretty fun. And speaking of attractions, the very last thing we did in that area was we crossed this sort of weaved rope bridge, and that bridge went over the outdoor hippo waters. But like I said, by the time we went over that, they were inside, so mostly it was just for seeing the neat view and just getting over there. And it was actually a bit of a trek, too, to even get to that spot. It wasn't nearly as long as walking the whole zoo, obviously, but, it was a condensed section of different obstacles. You could, walk on top of stumps. There were a lot of kids mostly climbing over these areas, but it was just you had to walk over rocks and stumps, or you could walk around them like we did to just even get toward the bridge in the first place and then cross it again. Now, one other thing actually that we didn't get to do, because by the time we got to it, it had just barely closed, was there was this lift that would take you up toward above the zoo where you could really look down. Of course, if I go back, that's something that I want to do, but we didn't get to do it on that day. And there is a lot that I skipped over in this, mainly because, if I didn't have video of it, I wasn't really super into talking about it. And plus, I want folks who listen to this that might be interested in seeing the zoo for themselves still have some surprises, still have some things that I didn't talk about here to go see for themselves. I had a really good time. I would probably return. I think we needed to go when we tried to get there the first time, just to be able to see some of the animals more active, especially things like the lions and the tigers, because they are felines, and if there's anything people know about felines, they like to sleep, especially in the afternoon. But we're not fortunate to be able to go in at 11:30 a.m. But we should be prepared next time. Should we decide to go again the next time I'm out there, or just some other time when I'm out there again, to see more activity in the zoo. But again, even without that, I had a lot of fun. Now, Tuesday was the busiest day because we had not one, not two, but three main activities on this day. But ironically, some of these might be some of the shorter ones to describe overall, because I only recorded footage at one of these three places. Two of them I would not think would be especially interesting for footage personally, or at least for sure with the third one. If you really want to see what it looks like, it's pretty easy to find video out there. The first place we went to that day was the first thing on my list when I even looked through like the tourism in the area, as far as like, oh, I definitely want to go here, which was the Manitou Springs Penny Arcade. And actually, first, I want to talk about the town of Manitou Springs itself. Or maybe it's Manitou Springs, but we had to walk a couple of blocks toward the arcade just based on where we parked, and I would say Manitou Springs is definitely the like touristy town of the Springs area. I saw lots of gift shops there. I saw lots of candy stores. Basically, if you're thinking of like a tourist trap sort of town, I feel like Manitou Springs kind of fit that definition to a T. And if there's anyone from the Midwest that's listening to this, of course, someone in Wisconsin, because that's what I know, of course, I would say, I would honestly call Manitou Springs sort of like Colorado's version of Wisconsin Dells, just without the water parks. I mean, it's not nearly as big, but it's definitely got the same type of vibe as the Dells does, in my opinion. And, I can admit, having gone to the arcade, it wasn't everything that I'd hoped it would be, but honestly, that isn't necessarily their fault. Because for one thing, all the games were true to their original value, right? This is a penny arcade, so there were games that would only cost a penny. There were ones that only cost a nickel or a dime. But then, like the retro arcade games, like, your Pac-Mans and such, yes, those cost a quarter. The oldest stuff, I would say, was the neatest stuff there. And I didn't get to play a ton of them, but for example, there was a shooting gallery game that I played that did cost a quarter for 2 plays, and it had physical targets that popped up. There was a driving game that cost a dime. One of the 2 units of it was out of order, but the one that did work, you could see, basically the way the steering wheel worked is that it controlled a little top-down car on a paper display, and the goal was to keep the car on the drawn-out road. And so, like, that kind of stuff, I thought that was really cool. They did have a proper, like, branded skee-ball game. So, like, if you ever see what, kind of comes across as, like, this is generic skee-ball, they had, a giant unit that was just purely that. So, for anyone who thinks, like, when they look up skee ball and they see the thing that's got, like, the brown skee balls and it seems like it's mostly just using, like, lines and colors for its logo. I'll probably pull a picture up of it here because I didn't have footage of it, but I'll just show you what I'm talking about. If you ever see this, no, this is a real thing. This is skee ball, not some not just some other skee ball style game. I did play plenty of the proper, like, 80s arcade cabinets too. Played Donkey Kong, played Miss Pac-Man, Dig Dug. One that I really liked was Super Off-Road. But, outside of Super Off-Road, I kind of struggled at some of these, and I wish I had done better at the games. But, it is what it is now. I did win a couple of races in Super Off-Road, but I did have trouble getting past the first couple of levels in some of those other games. And really, my issues with the place is I feel like the game variety was kind of skewed, right? They had those old games, and yeah, if you're going to be a penny arcade, you got to have those old games. And like I said, those are really, really, really cool. And they had a lot of 80s classics, but I think they could have probably halved the number of Ms. Pac-Man cabinets that they had, because it seemed like they had like 6 to 8 cabinets of that. And they could have put other stuff in there as well. They did have a couple of modern games, especially redemption-style games where you get tickets. But it seemed like the mid to late 90s and the early 2000s games were pretty sparse there. And just to put it into perspective, and I guess technically this is an early 90s game, but they did not have a single variety of a Street Fighter II cabinet of any kind. Only probably the most iconic fighting game out there, and they didn't have a cabinet of it. And if you're going to be an arcade that's trying to pride itself on having tons of arcade games, I feel like that's a pretty important cabinet to have. I did see a Tekken 3, and I did see, of all things, an X-Men versus Street Fighter cabinet, but beyond that, they really didn't have many other fighting games. I also understand, the number of arcade games from the 2000s especially is slimmer, but it's like, you couldn't spring to try to find a Mario Kart Arcade GP at least, or... I mean, that's really the main 2000s game I think about. Or, even if they really like their Namco games, it would have been great if they had one of those. Like in the 90s, Namco made these Namco Classic Collection cabinets. And those are the cabinets that have the arrangement games. So in Pac-Man Museum Plus, they have 2 Pac-Man arrangements. And one of them is from Volume 2 of that Classic Collection cabinet series. Plus, the first cabinet, that's the only way that I would ever be able to play Mappy Arrangement, and I'd really like to play that cabinet, but I digress. And on top of that, and I assume, like the zoo, we just kind of got unlucky as far as the day we came, but a lot of the games were out of order. There were some games that I think would have been really fun to play, but I couldn't play because it wasn't working. In fact, a 90s game that I wanted to play, Point Blank 2, speaking of Namco games, I guess, that cabinet was out of order, and Point Blank is a game that I'm actually pretty decent at, so that's a game that I didn't get to play, and I wanted to play it, and I couldn't because it was out of order. So again, I'm really hoping I just got unlucky. I will more than likely be going back, even though I did not do so hot at some of the games, but I if I were them, that's where I would work on next, is see if we can, maybe to the, like, it's okay to have some repeats, because some games you definitely want repeats of, but I don't think you need, like I said, 8 Ms. Pac-Mans is probably too many. Feel free to swap some of those out with some 90s and 2000s games, because that's really where I felt it was lacking at the moment. After we were done at the arcade, we did take a brief stop at the Garden of the Gods. That is a park that was donated to the city of Colorado Springs, under the one stipulation from the original landowners that the location that it is on had to be made free to the public in perpetuity. So if you ever want to go to the Garden of the Gods, it is free of charge. And I mean, again, it's a lot of big rocks, which, hey, those are pretty, but it's not like we got to see enough of it for me to really get a good impression overall of the park. Plus, as I've mentioned, I'm personally more of a water view type of person. I mean, again, rocks are cool. I would go back again to look at more of the views, and there were definitely some cool things there. I thought it was really neat seeing people with permits. They made clear that you had to have permits. Climbing up the rocks is there, or the rocks there as well, if I could, put my words in the right order. But, it was just a lot of the same views that I'd been seeing already, so I can't say that I was like, whoa, this is revolutionary. To me, it was just like, okay, I mean, these are big rocks, it's cool. I understand it's an iconic area, but it just wasn't personally doing anything for me, especially on that day. But our final stop of the day was another thing that we'd had planned, which was to play some games at Top Golf. Now, if you don't know what that is, I don't entirely blame you. It has been around for like 20 years, but because of the type of experience it is, it seems like they've limited their locations to just major cities for the most part. And I would describe Top Golf as like a gamified driving range, and folks who have been listening from the very start will probably know that I've played some amount of golf for years, and I have been trying to get more back into it with some very level of success the last few years. I would say this year's probably been the most successful so far as me, at least, at the very least, practicing at driving range type places, but I have only played one round because golf is not cheap. I wish it was cheap, but alas, it is not. But, my experience at Top Golf is just one more example or one more instance on the list I can add to me playing this year. I didn't bring my own clubs along, so I did have to share in my father's clubs, but that was fine. I mean, men's clubs are men's clubs for the most part. They're not really, necessarily longer or shorter than any others. And then so the way it works is you have this netted range, and there are a variety of targets at different spots out on the range. And each golf ball has a tracker in it that syncs up to the bay that you are playing on. So when you hit the ball, the bay then will track where the ball is going to provide scores based on the games that you choose to play. So there's a few close-up red targets, there's some further along yellow targets, and even further along green and blue target, and the furthest out target is a white target, and then there's an area even farther in the back that would get you points if you landed all the way out there. And so we decided to play 2 rounds of the standard Top Golf game. And so the way that works is you score points for hitting the ball as close to the center of any of the targets, but you'll get more points if you also reach toward the further target. So, your score, like I said, is based on your proximity to the center. And if you went for that white target that's the furthest out and got to the center, you would get really, really good points to me. And I had fun doing it, but from my experience, I don't know if I would say I would do Top Golf again. Okay, it was unique, right? I can give Top Golf that. It is a unique idea, and I thought it was really, really cool to have this sort of gamified golf idea, but I had some major scoring issues, okay? I understand the ideas that they're kind of going for. They want your score tied to the first target that you hit. So for example, right, I mentioned there's this green target ahead of the blue target, but I don't think you could necessarily do this specifically unless you are on one of the right side bays. But if your ball initially lands somewhere in the green target, but it rolls into the blue target, doesn't matter where you end up in the blue target, you will get scored for where it lands in the green target, and that's fine by me. Okay, that's the idea. Those are the rules. You landed in a target, so those are the points that you get. Okay. My problem is it doesn't seem like the game accounts for roll when you don't land the ball within a target immediately. So for example, right, we were further on the left side, so we were closer to where the blue target is on the layout that we had. So if I say land where the ball initially hits the grass is toward the left of the blue target, but by the time the ball ends up, based on how it rolls, near the center of the blue target, kind of like what would happen if you landed on a fairway, right? Your ball's not just going to stick to the ground wherever it lands initially. It's going to roll, right? I had a lot of times where something like that would happen, and I got a grand total of 0 points for my shot. And there were, like I said, there were a lot of shots where that is exactly what happened, and I found that to be very, very frustrating. And I can't comment on, any of the other games because we didn't play them, but a lot of the other games use the targets too, so if they're like the standard Top Golf, I don't know if I can say I would like those games better, because I really strongly believe that when your scoring is based on the targets, your score should be wherever the ball finally ends up, I should say, with the exception of if it specifically hit a target first. So if it lands in a target, count those points. If it lands somewhere in the unmarked fairway and ends up in a target by the end of the roll, that I think should still count for points. I should also point out, though, you can correct your score for each ball but I also don't think it's reasonable to expect me to fix the score on each shot, especially because, there are players out there that could abuse that. They could cheat. It could cause some mistrust among your other players of your scores if they're not paying attention to where your shot ended up. In that scenario, it's perfectly possible that obviously I was watching where the ball went. I saw that the ball ended up in the blue target space, but if the people I'm playing with, which again in this case are my father and my stepmother, if they're not watching and they're like, did that ball really end up in the blue target, because they're not watching where I'm playing, again, that's going to cause some mistrust, and I think that is poor design. And interestingly, they did have some more like video gamey type games that you could use as like how you played. And initially, I wasn't interested in playing those, but now having experienced how the targeting works, I think those games actually could have been more fun. They did have an Angry Birds, like an actual Angry Birds branded game, where the way that you have the birds getting shot out of the slingshot is in correlation to the shot that you take with your golf ball. So, when you shoot the ball, the arc that you track is going to match up to where the like bird would end up hitting the tower if you're playing it like it was Angry Birds. And I think that would be a lot more fun, because you're not actually reliant on the targets. You're reliant on like, okay, I can visualize on the screen here, okay, there's a lot of stuff still on the right side of the tower. I need to turn more toward the right now, and that's where I'm going to be aiming my golf ball. So, but honestly, initially for that reason, that was why I didn't want to do it. I wanted to use the targets, but that I found that did not end up being as fun as I thought it would be. They also had a puzzle game that eliminates blocks based on where the golf ball ends up in the range. And then from there, it turns into like a match 3 sort of Bejeweled-like game once you have jewels form a line. So it's like, I think it eliminates a block based on where you land it, because I'm not sure how it would move it necessarily. But if you form a line of 3 by doing that, like if I have an array where I have 2 green blocks next to each other, and then I hit a red block that has a green block above it, and the green block falls where the red block was, I get points for eliminating the red block and making a line of the green ones as well. And to me, that just seems kind of hard to visualize. It's kind of hard to figure out, like, well, where in the range, where exactly is this location in relation to like the spot that I'm hitting the ball, which is why I wasn't really interested in trying it. But again, just based on how the targeting went and how the scoring system worked, I'd actually be a little more persuaded to try those if I were to go back again. And like I said, maybe I would try Top Golf again. Right now, I'm not the most persuaded to, but I think something either needs to be done in improving the technology to make sure that when the tracker is sending the information to the bay, that it's further accounting for the roll, or the scores just need to be, like, the rules need to be updated so that the roll is accounted for. I'm not sure which one of those is the issue. I'm kind of leaning toward it being more a technology thing than anything, but that kind of thing needs to be changed, because I found that frustrating. It's not like this is an actual sporting event. This is supposed to be a fun activity that you're paying money for, so I think it's okay for it to lean on being a little bit easier than being a little bit harder for what it is, right? By the end, we did have a little more time. We booked the bay for 2 hours, and we had like 15 minutes by the time we were done with the last game. So my dad and I did try out one simulation hole, and in that mode, the bay just translates the shots that you make into how they would play out in theory on a handful of real-world courses. So my dad and I were like, let's just play one hole. We played hole 6 at Pebble Beach, which is a par 5. I got a single bogey on it, which I can assure you would not happen in real life. And also the way they did, like, you don't actually get to putt because there's no putting area, but basically wherever you would shoot toward the red targets, I believe, the closest ones with a chip, and based on how that was shot, the bay just essentially makes a calculation like, okay, this is likely what your score would be as a result of that shot. Like, here's where it would have ended up on the green. This is probably how many putts you would need to take, so here's what you got. But I very much doubt that on a professional PGA level course, I would get a single bogey on any hole, even especially a par 5. But hey, I mean, apparently I'm good enough to get just a single bogey on a PGA hole, and as a not professional golfer, I'm pretty proud of that. All right, Wednesday. This is the last day that we went out and did some stuff actively. And this is where we had our one unplanned initially activity, which was a trip into the Cave of the Winds. And this is actually something that, well before my father considered moving out to Colorado, his brother, my uncle, went and he checked it out. So it seemed like something that would be interesting to fill up a day. And we did have another activity planned initially, but that did fall through this time because we would have again needed to book tickets that we did not prepare to book. But alas, that will be corrected likely the next time that I go out there, but we shall see. But the Cave of the Winds did fill in that gap, and it turns out there were 3 potential tours that we could go on, but we went on the most basic one, which is called the Discovery Tour. I wanted to go on the more hardcore Haunted Lantern Tour, which that's actually the one that my uncle and my cousin went on, but my dad wasn't especially interested in it. I guess he's just not as hardcore as I am, but I would have wanted to do it. Although going on the Discovery the Discovery Tour was still fun, and something that I did get out of going on that tour that I would not have been able to get going on the Haunted Lantern Tour was some footage to use here, because the Discovery Tour did have some somewhat impressive lighting built into the cave, whereas on the Lantern Tour, each participant would have to hold a fire-lit lamp along the way, so it's not nearly as well lit up. So as a result of having some lights around, I was able to get video. I mean, it is still a cave, so the video can only be so good because it's inevitably going to be dark, but I did get some stuff that I actually thought looked kinda, at least acceptable for the fact that I'm within a cave, okay? But before we could even get in there were a couple of snafus, okay? For one thing, an aspect of purchasing the tickets that my father did not read was that he needed to go up to the counter to get a confirmation pass, and that's basically just a slip saying, hey, here's how many people are in our ticket group. So, we had a tour that was supposed to leave at 12:40, and we were standing in line at like 12:30 trying to get that little bit figured out, which was kind of annoying, but it was fine. It worked out. But that was only strike one, because on top of that, the folks who work at the cave made the error that their physical paper tour schedules and the schedule that they had posted online for that day were different. So our tour guide, he's, we have to sit in this I guess it's kind of like an outdoor gazebo. It's not really what I think of when I think of a gazebo, but it's just an enclosed area, I guess. Well, it's not really enclosed, it's just a roofed area, okay? And so he's gathering people for the 12:45 tour. So we, and then a bunch of other folks that are supposed to be 12:40ers are just okay, I guess we're going to go along with this group because, we're 12:40. It's already past 12:40, and we never had a 12:40 tour guide come up to us, so what the heck's going on here? And so the long story short is then the tour guide's well, that's kind of weird. So he goes back down to the place that we had just checked in, and I was okay, so turns out on the site they were booking tours that weren't in our actual schedule, but he was able to get another tour guide to take what was going to be his group, and then he took us. So in the end, all's well that ends well, and so, that is one of many reasons why I would say our tour guide was a great tour guide. He wanted a shout-out, so shout-outs to Jackson at the Cave of the Winds. He was a really cool tour guide. He did a great job, in my opinion. I know it's not a Google review or a Yelp review like he wanted, But I do consider the fact that I can still give good press verbally to be good press as well, even though this doesn't have the same reach as a Google review will have. But hey, shout outs to Jackson. You did a good job there. But anywho, we were able to take this nice 45-minute trek throughout the Discovery Tour section of the cave. And it was pretty interesting. The tour consisted of our guide mostly teaching us about, like, hey, here are the formations in the cave. Here's what they're shaped like. Here's what you need to look out for. Hey, look, there's that thing that I said is what it was. And we were also explicitly told not to touch the walls. We were told not to even let our clothes really touch it because that can damage the cave. So we were vigilant to avoid doing that. I can pretty much guarantee you, though, there was definitely some inevitable brushing of shirts in some areas by some folks. Not me, though. I'm not big enough for this to necessarily happen, or clumsy enough, fortunately, to have that happen. But there were some areas that got pretty narrow, so, and there was at least some space in the Temple of Silence, as it was called, that had some concrete for us to lean on. And, of course, it is a cave, so like I mentioned, there's no natural lighting in there, so they had plenty of artificial lighting for us to use. So for the most part, I was reliant on the lights in the cave for the footage that you video folks are seeing right now. But I know it's not the best, but obviously bright video where you can see would be ideal. I can't get that in the cave. But the one area that I can say where I certainly couldn't even film is this portion that I distinctly remember where he took us into a completely unlit area of the cave. And to me, I think this is the best story from the experience, even though I literally can't show it. So the guide brings a kid up to the head of the group, and he gives him an old lantern, which is actually the same kind that they would use on the Haunted Lantern tour. And so he gives him a little pep talk. I'm like, all right, you're going to lead us down this little like hall here. But hey, if you're somebody in the middle of the group or you're toward the back of the group, please use your flashlights, because you're probably not going to be able to see this little firelit lamp from way back wherever you are. And eventually we get into the middle of this like hall-like area of the cavern. And so he has us stop and he has us turn off our lights, and he even extinguishes the lantern. And that was so we could experience total cave darkness, which, yeah, that is definitely some of the darkest darkness that you can experience. And so much so that in minutes you're going to start hallucinating. And I think he said after a year, you'd have to have spent a year in complete cave darkness to just go blind, because your retinas would have no reason to function, because there's literally no stimulus for them to experience. So, I mean, there might be a bit of a citation needed on that claim, because I don't know for sure if it would be a year, but that seems pretty reasonable to me. But I can also admit, though, that the shirt I chose for that day, as well as the watch that I was wearing, did kind of ruin the illusion for me, because, I just had to go with my glow-in-the-dark Ghost Trick shirt, and my watch has glow-in-the-dark elements, and, of course, we're in a cave in the darkest area, so here they are kind of glowing. I hope it did not ruin things for other folks in the cave at that spot, but still, the complete cave darkness, to the extent that I really got the experience, was really neat. So, bottom line, fantastic tour. I would go back again for the more complex tours, but I am glad that I started on the easiest tour, because there were some fairly narrow areas, and though I think I would have enjoyed the Haunted Lantern tour more, if there are areas in there that are just as narrow, I could see it definitely being a little, like, easier to trip, or just have it, be a clumsier tour because you can't see as much. Certainly, I think we'd all be fine, because, the people who are leading the tours are all trained, but some of the stairs, for example, in the areas that we went up in the Discovery tour were pretty narrow. So, like I said, fun place. I would recommend going to it if you're interested in caves. It was also nice and cool in there, too. It was a cool 52 degrees compared to the 80s or 90s it was outside, so that was nice, too. Overall, fun time. And after that experience, we did spend some time doing something that I always like to do on a trip, which is to do a little bit of game hunting. And no, I do not mean animal game, I mean finding video games out there. Because sure, yes, literally any game I could want is available anywhere if I look hard enough, but there's something fun about like going to a local store that's only in that area that I'm not going to find anywhere else and seeing what they have, even though it's perfectly possible that that exact game that they have on the shelf could show up the next time I go to a shop around me. So we made a couple of we made specifically 3 stops at shops in the Springs area. One that was a mostly, because I had a couple of movies there, but is pretty much just a dedicated game shop. And 2 that were like some more broader interest shops. At the dedicated shop is where I made like 75% of my purchases. I had bought 2 Wii U games there, which were Pac-Man and the Ghostly Adventures 2, because I think having both games is going to finally motivate me to sit down and finish those, especially since they should be fairly short games too, and playing them one after the other should just kind of make it almost feel more like one game. And then I also got Mario and Sonic at the Sochi 2014 Olympic Winter Games. Say that game title 3 times fast, that's a long game. Mario and Sonic at the Sochi 2014 Olympic Winter Games. It's fortunately not that much of a tongue twister, but it's just a long name. And they did have the Rio 2016 game there on Wii U, but that game was like $90 compared to the $35 for Sochi, and I prefer the Winter Games, so it didn't really hurt me too bad to not get that one, but it is a game I want to get eventually, because that makes it now the only game of that series that I'm missing out on. And it's actually a bit of a rarer Wii U game to boot, so I have not played any of these games yet. I just haven't had the time to sit down and play those. I've been spending time working on this and doing other stuff. I also did get a Wii title there. I got Kirby's Epic Yarn, because, I don't know, Kirby's Epic Yarn isn't really that rare of a game, but it's been surprisingly elusive for me. And all these games, right? I could have bought them online at some point if I wanted to, but I think it's more fun to get a game at a shop. I'd rather give a physical business that's, renting a location or leasing a location, which I guess is probably just the same thing. I'd rather give them money if I can. So I was glad to pick that up there as well. And I'm not going to name any of the shops I went to here because I'm not advertising them. And similarly, as far as any problems go, I don't really want to blast them either. But I did have some problems with this first shop. What I liked about them a lot, amazing selection of games. If you wanted a heavy hitter on a system there, more than likely they had a copy of it. Of course, I got those titles that I listed, but, they had some great 3DS games, including one that I've been looking for, which is Professor Layton and the Azran Legacy, but, notice I didn't pick up that game. You could get Dragon Quest VIII on the PS2. They had a lot of GameCube necessities there. They even had a GameCube preview disc, which I thought it was an actual kiosk demo disc, but I couldn't confirm it, and I will explain why shortly. Looking back, though, if I were to have gotten one more game there, it probably would have been that preview disc. That's the one thing that I can say looking back on it, where it's like, I do kind of regret not getting that one. But that gets to my 2 problems with that specific store, which is, number 1, the prices. I think what I got was fairly reasonably priced. They were a little above market value when you look at their condition on price charting, just, complete in box. How much does Kirby's Epic Yarn go for? But I didn't consider them to be ridiculously above value. You're talking like $5, maybe $10 here. And when you look at the prices on price charting, they don't account for the shipping costs. So, it's just the final price that it's sold for. So when the difference is like $5 and that's about what shipping goes for, at least for any game, I would say I got pretty much a fair deal on the ones I did get. But some other games, like a certain 3DS game I mentioned, was astronomically high. And I understand, I get it. 3DS games right now are expensive, but the general going rate for Professor Layton and the Azran Legacy is like give or take $200 complete right now, which is still more than I would want to pay for it. So hopefully we just continue to see prices trending down on that game. Maybe the condition they had on it was sealed, but either way, trying to sell a game that right now is regularly going for around $200, $250 at the most for $340 is like a really big markup. And, maybe who sold it to them wanted as close to the market value as possible. So I understand you're a business, you need to make a profit on it. But at the end of the day, it's not my issue as a customer that you guys overpaid for a game by too much to get it in stock. Again, I'm not saying that's what happened there, but when you're talking about the price being that far off, that's kind of the impression that I get is what happened there, because we're talking about a difference of like 1.7 times. My other issue, and this is why I didn't even look at the preview disc since I thought there was a chance that it wasn't anything special, was that every game, whether it was your like not so good licensed game or if it was Dragon Warrior 4, not Dragon Quest 4 on the DS, the actual Dragon Warrior 4 on the NES, a rare NES game, every game was inside a glass case. So in order to look at a game, I would need to have an employee come up and take the game out of the case. So in other words, I basically had to assume that the copy they had in there would be a good copy of the game in the case, not one that say had repro box art, which no, I'm not accusing them of doing that, but I've just, at least in my area, and I didn't see this until I moved to where I am now, but there are a lot of places around here that are okay just slipping in a reproduction box art for game cases if they can put it in a case. To be fair, a lot of those same places will also explicitly mark that, but I don't think they're really accounting for the price difference as often as they should be, because, guys, I'd really like the genuine art supposed to be in the box, but I digress. But my point is, they at this shop, they probably could have sold me on more stuff, or maybe just they could have sold me on some different stuff if I could have walked up to a shelf and picked up the box and looked at it and read it and, just got to handle it in my hands and decide like, oh, you know what, I do want this. Maybe there is crime in the area that is causing them to decide, well, we need to put this all of our games in a more secure area. But, I mean, come on, guys. If someone's going to break and enter and steal stuff, I don't think a glass case is going to stop them from trying to steal the game. So, overall, mixed bag of a shop, but I did get some good stuff there. The next place we went to was more of a music and movie store, but they did have a small game selection, and obviously that was where my interests laid mostly. And when I say small, I mean small. It really was not that much to write home about as far as I was concerned, but I like giving not just pure game shops a chance sometimes because they can have some good stuff hiding, and this was indeed a place that had something like that. I got a copy. I was able to get a copy of We Love Golf, which is another Wii title, which, it might not sound like that great of a game until you consider We Love Golf is a Camelot-developed golf game. So in other words, this game is basically like the generic... it's a game with generic people published by Capcom instead of like characters, but it's as close to like what you're going to see as the Wii's entry in the Mario Golf series, since Camelot didn't get to make a Mario Golf or an original Mario Tennis on the Wii. They just had the new Play Control Mario Power Tennis, and there was just plain no Mario Golf on Wii, so I wanted it for that. Plus, since this is a Capcom game, they did allow the generic people in game to have some crossover unlockable costumes, including 2 Ace Attorney costumes, which makes me happy as well. So it definitely had that going for it. And then the last place that we stopped at is, it seems like it's a part of a chain that's sort of more along the west side of the U.S. And this store was huge. It had tons of movies. It had a lot of music. It had a lot of games. I could have even gotten like some manga in there if I had wanted to. I could have purchased an honest to goodness Master Sword, but of course my focus was on the game selection, and they did have some good stuff. I almost pulled the trigger on a DS game because they did have a copy of Trauma Center Under the Knife 2, and it was below the value of the game Loose that they had it going for. But there were 2 things that prevented me from doing that, which would be a desire to actually get the proper box and manual later, which I suspect getting just the box and manual would be a lot harder than spending the amount of money to get it all in one. And plus, I'd already spent like $100 that day, so I was at my limit more or less. But what really killed the experience at this last shop for me was that the store put every game on the shelf, which, hey, that probably doesn't sound bad. I mean, they did have like the rare, really good stuff in cases, like Trauma Center Under the Knife 2. But they had a lot of games like out on their shelves, and that meant that what they actually had were mostly loose copies of games in generic cases. And that doesn't have to be a problem, right? I have a lot of games that are still in generic boxes from like my earlier game purchases. And if I really want the legitimate box, I am glad, for a lot of games, either just finding another copy to provide a box for and selling the loose disc, or just either getting the box and manual on its own if it's an option, right? But all of the generic boxes they had there were identical. And with so many generic boxed games sitting on the shelf next to each other, I'm going to tell you, it just made the browsing experience a disaster. Because it's very possible, right, that I could have walked out there with something if I didn't have to just sit and painstakingly look closely at every single generic box with a handwritten title on it. So they just generically print out like, okay, here's the printout we use for this box, and let me now just write in by hand what this game is. And that was not fun. So I did not end up getting anything from there. But that covers out the activities from that trip of mine. The long and short of it, I did have a fun time, and I will definitely be going back, but admittedly, my reason for going back isn't so much because like, oh man, I had like the greatest, most amazingest time out there. It's because I have an immediate family member living out there. And that's not to say there's anything wrong with Colorado per se, but like I said, when I was talking about my time in the mountain park or in the Garden of the Gods, right? I prefer scenery with more water in it. The mountains, they're just not my preferred view. They're cool. They're just not my absolute favorite thing. I mean, tall views, they're really neat. Getting really close up to the rocks and like actually getting to look up at them, that's really cool. But you definitely did have to stay farther away from a lot of them. But yeah, that state, it's a fun place. If any of this sounds like something you'd like to do, I would recommend traveling out there, and I will more than likely be going out there again at some point. Now let's do a little bit more of a traditional topic for this episode. I did mention on the last show that I saw this article that kind of annoyed me, right? And I wanted to respond to it here, and so that's what we're going to be doing now. And my goal, it's not to call out this author. Even if by some miracle there are more than 0 people that listen to this, I still want 0 people to go after the author of this article. It will be linked below if you want to read it, but again, don't go after the guy. I cannot stress this enough. Leave the author alone, okay? I have issues with articles that take the premise, or just people in general, I suppose, when they're making the claim that, you know what? I think Sega should go back into making game consoles. And it isn't because I wouldn't be interested in a new Sega console. In fact, it's far from it. It is just specifically that the idea of Sega making hardware again is a really fanciful idea, and a lot of times the arguments in favor of it don't really address the real issues that would prevent Sega from re-entering the console space. But first, I want to go over the arguments made in this article on a comic book resource that's headlined, "It's time for Sega to rejoin the console markets." Their first argument, and I'm paraphrasing the exact wording on this, is that 3D adventure games and first-person shooters they're not in vogue anymore. So the opening paragraph of the argument, it's actually one that I wanted to quote here, so let me just quick pull it up. Quote, "One of the biggest reasons Sega started failing in the mid-90s was its aversion to gaming trends. The N64 and PlayStation finally took console gaming into the 3D realm, and players immediately became hooked. Though arcade ports, 2D side-scrollers, puzzle games, and JRPGs were still fun, gamers had little desire to play them and instead were interested in 3D adventure and first-person shooter games like GoldenEye 007, Tomb Raider, and Metal Gear Solid." And my response to that is, huh? I mean, like, I'm just kind of miffed at some of the genre examples they bring up, or that the author brings up specifically, because it's not like there weren't popular arcade ports during the Saturn era, right? I mentioned the arcade version of this earlier, but like Tekken. Tekken was an arcade port. That was pretty popular. But, obviously there were others too. Cruisin' USA and the others in the Cruisin' series. Those were moderately popular N64 arcade ports. It's not like Mortal Kombat and Killer Instinct were still like they were still going fairly strong back during this time too. So, I mean, I guess, sure, arcade ports weren't as prevalent during the Saturn era as they were when the NES and the Super Nintendo are out, but it's like, this is kind of anachronistic to say that, like, only 3D adventure games and first-person shooters are popular during the Saturn era, and arcade ports weren't. Now, sure, I will grant you there weren't as many 2D side-scrollers, too, but that's also kind of a weird one, because it's not like we didn't have Mega Man 8 during the Saturn era. It's not like we didn't get Mega Man X, 4, and 5, and 6 on the PS1. They didn't really seem to lose that much popularity on the PlayStation. You had cinematic 2D games. You had your Oddworld games. You had Heart of Darkness. Those were well known. Like I said, I will grant you, I think this argument holds up more than the argument on arcade ports. But and they might be liked more now. But I think it's fair to say, like, yeah, Klonoa, the original Rayman, even Castlevania, Symphony of the Night. They were looked over in favor of 3D games, especially in those series. But it's not like there weren't people who didn't play them back in the day. So again, I think it's just, I'm not sure why we have to have this kind of anachronism going on here. The one that I think agree the strongest on is puzzle games, but I also think that's kind of a weird example genre to bring up, because I don't think outside of Tetris and, the match threes of the modern times, I can't think of a time when puzzle games have ever really been like, whoa, everybody's into puzzle games, man. So, I don't know, that just seems like a really easy one to bring up here. But the genre that this author brings up in that paragraph that really comes off strange to me in saying that, the push for 3D adventure and first-person shooter games is over, and those are all that were popular back in the day, is JRPGs. Because look, sure, I don't remember the Saturn or the Dreamcast having tons of RPG or JRPGs, so I guess citing it as a genre example when you compare like Sega's options to the N64 and the PlayStation is kind of strange to me. But even then, right? It's not like the Saturn era. It's not like the fifth generation of consoles is like when the JRPG boom started in the West or anything, right? Like Final Fantasy VII. Like, do I even need to cite others? Like this exact era that the author is bringing up when it's like, it was just 3D adventure games and it was first-person shooters that were popular, is like when the JRPG of all JRPGs, arguably the most beloved JRPG of all time, came out and had popularity. Like, am I missing something here? And it's not like it was the only one. There's Final Fantasy VIII, there's Final Fantasy IX. It wasn't as popular, but Dragon Warrior 7 came out at the time. Paper Mario is like the one major N64 JRPG that's beloved. I mean, Ogre Battle's in there too, but it's more of a strategy RPG. There's Suikoden, there's Xenogears, there's Grandia, there's Chrono Cross, Breath of Fire, Parasite Eve, Legend of Dragoon. Like, really? Like, JRPGs were entering a renaissance during this era. So, again, why are, like, sure, I agree, Sega didn't necessarily have a ton of these, but, like, why are we throwing these other genres under the bus as if they didn't have popular games during their time? Like, I don't get it. But sure, I would also agree that the Saturn's biggest mistake, this is something that gets brought up in the second paragraph of this argument, is like Sega's bet was like, okay, with the hardware we're going to emphasize making even better 2D games as opposed to hardware that's best for making 3D games. And it was obvious that 3D games, now that you could do 3D games, that was the future. Because, if you're a game player and you've always been limited to 2D spaces, why wouldn't you be interested in now having a Z-axis and having even bigger world? So I agree. That, that was clearly the future, and Sega made the wrong bet with the Saturn's hardware not doing that. But that doesn't change the fact that these genres cited earlier also still had some popularity, and if anything, what should be cited here as drowning the Saturn is something that got mentioned briefly in the opening paragraph of this article, which is, really the reason the Saturn was unpopular. Because, I'm not going to say that it would have eaten the PlayStation's lunch or even the N64's lunch necessarily, but it could have. I think the split between N64, PlayStation, and Saturn could have been a lot more even had Sega, for one thing, not annoyed retailers, right? By just, hey, we're going to shadow release our new console, right? Just out of the blue. But also, before that, they made peripheral after peripheral for the Genesis / the Mega Drive for the rest of the world. But you had consumers feeling burned that well, hey, I just got this Sega CD and now they're releasing the 32X. And then so maybe then you had someone's like, oh, hey, I just got this 32X and now they're releasing a brand new system. So you're not necessarily getting a lot of value for the system. So I'm not saying that this doesn't apply, but it's I don't understand why this isn't being cited as why the Saturn, didn't do so hot at the time. But, that anachronism alone, I think, is the least of the problems here, because my real problem comes in the last paragraph of argument 1. Quote, Sega wasn't making what players were asking for and what was earning Nintendo and Sony massive profits, and that ultimately cost the company its future in the console market. However, as we've seen in recent years with the success of games like Undertale, Spiritfarer, Among Us, and Cuphead, players are now much more open and willing to experience great games in various forms. The hyper-obsession with 3D adventure and shooter games is over, and gamers now welcome a much larger diversity of gameplay styles. Sega's games would likely be better received in today's market, unquote. And sure, I absolutely agree. I do think Sega's games of the mid to late 90s and early 2000s, assuming they, lived up to today's standards instead, they probably would be better received today because people are enjoying a greater variety of genres and they're into weird games again. And you can see Sega occasionally doing the weird game. They are making a new Samba de Amigo, but I think this argument comes with the most important anachronism, which is, that example I just cited of Sega making a new Samba de Amigo isn't the norm for Sega anymore. That isn't to say that I think Sega is necessarily following the trends as far as we're just going to make the games that are popular right now. But I think this article is making the assumption that Sega is just consistently either making weird stuff or they're making games in just all kinds of their different IPs, which they're not really doing anymore. If you look at some of the Sega internal developed games in the last few years, it proves my point, right? I'm not going to pretend there's no outliers, but just let's look at some of the common games that have popped up so far during the 2020s. There's a lot of Yakuza games, which is now known as Like a Dragon. I'm also including in that list of that series, there's Judgment and its sequel, because they're the same sort of style games. And if I recall, the developer said the series are connected. Don't quote me on that. I don't remember for sure, but they definitely have a similar gameplay style. Okay, what else are they making a lot of? They're making a lot of Sonic. There's the occasional Atlas title in there, and those have largely just been Persona lately. And then they have a lot of old school re-releases. But like I said, there are some outliers. They have had a couple of Monkey Ball games, but that's also a bit of a weird series to quantify since, I don't know, Super Monkey Ball seems to get it's like in this weird area of getting frequent and infrequent releases. Puyo Puyo Tetris 2 came out in the 2020s, but that's the one Puyo game of this decade so far. They did do Phantasy Star Online 2, and they even did a port of Virtua Fighter 5, which completely came out of nowhere, as far as I'm concerned. But it's not like those series are getting consistent releases. I also, outside of maybe Super Monkey Ball, wouldn't really consider any of these series to be especially weird. You're talking about a Tetris-style puzzle game. You're talking about a fighting game. You're talking about an MMORPG. Like, they're not super weird. But yeah, if you look at like Sega's late 90s output, oh, yeah, if Sega were still constantly making games like that, I think this argument would hold up more. But that's just not so much what they're doing right now. And I don't understand why the idea of making a new console is going to result like in let's make a new Knights game, or let's make a new entry in the Space Channel 5 series, or let's make a new Jet Set Radio, because for one thing, they can do that right now if they wanted to, but making a new console doesn't necessarily like motivate them more to do that. The second argument here in this piece is that weird games are like the it thing right now. Again, this is a paraphrase, but honestly, looking at this, I don't know if I really have more to add to this argument, because I think it mostly retreads the first counter argument I made. Because yeah, sure, Sega doesn't always follow the it thing, and today they don't necessarily do that either. But they're also not, again, just making tons and tons of weird games like they used to. I would love to see a new entry in a couple of the series that the author mentions here. I'd love to see a new Seaman game, because it's just so weird, and I think it's really cool for that reason. Or even a new Typing of the Dead. I think that's just fun. But like, if Sega's not making these now, how does spending money that they don't have to make a console result in them making these types of games, right? Like, and even then, like, let's say they did make a new console and they made these games, right? Is it necessarily the case that people will then pick them up again, right? If anything, I think this exact line of thinking is better for an argument to say that, hey, Sega needs to re-release some of these weirder games, and they need to market them heavily as a test to see, like, should we start making more of these, like, smaller series again? Should we start making more of these weirder series again? Because, maybe since people do like weirder games, maybe they would like a weird game. Maybe they would like to see Seaman come back. Maybe that would work out now in the 2020s, even though it didn't work out as well in the 90s. Argument number 3, digital re-releases would attract third parties. But really, from the argument laid out in the paragraphs, the author is more relying on independent developers. And I think this is an especially strange argument because it opens on, Sega lost a lot of third-party devs during the Saturn era, and then that kind of carried mostly into the Dreamcast era, and that's all true, okay? I'm not going to argue that, right? But then it goes off in a completely different direction because the author starts talking about how, digital distributions made it easy for indie devs for them to release games on consoles right now, and that would really help out this theoretical new Sega console because, maybe they won't get the big third-party games, but they'll get a lot of indie games, and people love indie games, right? The Wii U and the PlayStation Vita, I think I'm getting a call from each of them because they want to ask how well that approach worked out for them. Okay, I mean, I like the Wii U. There's a lot of people who like the PlayStation Vita too, right? But okay, those are a lot of what those libraries had, okay? That exact kind of framework, right? They had a lot of independent games, and they were lucky when they got some major third-party releases, but wouldn't you know, what else was the commonality between them? They didn't perform too well in sales. So, I don't get it. Not only is this article presupposing, right, that Sega would have the funds to do all the R&D, to make a console, to do the advertising, to release it, to maintain an ecosystem for it, but the specific suggestion that's being made to bring it games for their software catalog is the exact kind of catalog that hurt two fairly recent other pieces of hardware made by businesses that have a lot more money to take that risk on. So I don't, was this not considered when making this argument? Like, I can't be the only one who thought about this. I have a very hard time thinking that the editor who had to read this article wasn't like, well, didn't this happen with these two other consoles too? Or maybe, I mean, maybe not. Maybe they really didn't think about this. And I also want to respond to this idea. Like, I'm not as convinced that Sega's relationship with other publishers would still be destroyed today, because I think that's assuming that the relationship from the mid to late 90s still applies today, which that isn't necessarily the case at all. You know, you look at, I know this is like a very microcosm of an example, right? But you look at like the games on Sega Genesis and Mega Drive Switch Online, and you compare that to the output in NES and SNES Online. Genesis Online actually has Capcom games and Konami games. Not a ton of them, but I mean, it's got Strider, it's got Castlevania, it's got Mega Man. Those are not on the other online services. So, you know, if Sega's able to go, because I would imagine it's them, right? I mean, maybe it's Nintendo, but like all the software descriptions are provided by Sega. So to me, I'm kind of getting the impression that it's like Sega's kind of doing the legwork on this, and they're just getting paid some level of commission by Nintendo to work on this service for them. But if they're able to do that, to me, that suggests that their relationship is at least good enough to where they would be willing to work on games together. But so again, I don't think that's necessarily the case. But even then, right? Let's just also grant, right? Let's pretend they made this theoretical console. If it didn't drum up the buzz that it needs to sell a lot of units, well, then yes, they would definitely be back in that scenario that they were in the late 90s, because you wouldn't see third parties flocking to it. But, you know, like you could see maybe out of the gate you have some big third party releases, but it could end up again being like the Wii U, where people are excited that there's somehow a new Sega console, but after that, when people start wondering like, oh, what is its purpose? Do I really need this? It could slow in sales and then also slow third party releases, or just stop them all together, and that wouldn't be to its detriment. Argument number 4. People love nostalgia, so Sega can bring back nostalgic properties. For one thing, on this point, I really think we're just getting closer and closer to people really being almost done with nostalgia, right? Okay, you look at why were people so excited for Super Mario Brothers Wonder? It's because it doesn't just lean on nostalgia. It does new stuff, okay? I was like really into Super Mario Brothers Wonder because it's like it looks new. It looks new. It's doing new things. It's not just like retreading of old ideas. To tie this into Sega, right? Why were people thrilled to hear that there's no Green Hill Zone of any kind in Sonic Superstars? It's because they're kind of done with nostalgia now, or at least they're getting sick of nostalgia. So, like, on its face, I don't think this argument holds up. But, even then, right? The author makes the argument that Sega's got, like, tons of properties that they could revitalize, or they could just at least port earlier entries in games to modern systems. And look, I do want many of these games at least ported for the sake of their continued availability, right? If someone wants to play Jet Set Radio, they should not have to go get a Dreamcast or go get an Xbox 360 or a PlayStation 3. They should be able to download that game on their PS5 or their Xbox Series X or their Switch right now, or their PC, right? So don't get me wrong, I would not disagree with that premise. I think that's a good argument. But at the same time, I mean, if Sega were interested in doing this, right? Why wouldn't they be doing it already? And I mean, to an extent they are, right? You look at Sega Ages, again, on Switch. You look at the Genesis and Mega Drive collection that they released. You look at, again, Genesis and Mega Drive Switch Online. You look at Sonic Origins. No matter how you feel about that game, right? Clearly, there is an extent to which Sega is relying on nostalgia as is. But if they thought that it would make them money to lean on nostalgia for their more esoteric series, if they thought it would make them money to lean on nostalgia for their less popular hardware like the Saturn and the Dreamcast, even though it's got a huge cult following, right? I'm not going to pretend like there aren't people who love the Dreamcast, right? Why do they need to... why wouldn't they be releasing these now? There's no reason that they can't release these now. And more importantly, why would they need to make a new console to do that again? What about making new hardware necessarily incentivizes the idea of that they'll bring back these nostalgic games, even though they were less popular, right? Sega could re-release these games now, or they can make new entries in them now. There's nothing saying they can't do that. But frankly, let's just cut out all of these arguments, because at the end of the day, they don't really matter. Because outside of the counter arguments to this article, the most important point to make here is Sega doesn't have the money to make a console. It doesn't matter how much you want a new Sega console. They do not have the cash to do it, okay? What is a commonality between the three major console makers right now, between Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo? It is that they make billions of dollars. So now it is time for me to be boring business statistics guy, because according to macro trends, I can give you some data. Now, what I'm going to give you here is Microsoft's annual operating income for 2022. Basically, this is just their total revenue, and then you subtract their operating expenses. So this is just how much money they have on hand, how much cash on hand they have after the fact to continue operating. So, business or economics people, please don't kill me. I'm not an expert in this. To me, this just seemed like this would be probably the correct number to use to give an idea of here's how much money they make while continuing to work on stuff, right? So Microsoft's 2022 annual operating budget, according to macro trends, $83.383 billion. Billion with a B dollars. Okay? Let's make an apples to apples comparison, because they did have 2023 numbers for Nintendo, but I'm going to use 2022 again, since I used 2022 for Microsoft, and that's what they had most recently for Microsoft. $5.276 billion. Now, that might sound like a huge drop, right? And I mean, it is. We're talking about a difference of, $78 billion, but you also have to remember, Microsoft's not just Xbox, their Windows, their Office, their, server services. Like Microsoft, way bigger business than Nintendo. So that $78 billion makes sense, right? Also, keep this in mind now that I'm going to tell you Sony's number 2. Sony's 2022 annual operating income, according to macro trends, $10.701 billion. So a business that makes just gaming hardware and just video games, and I guess they kind of make movies too now with Nintendo Pictures. The lowest annual operating income that we have here is Nintendo with a little over $5 billion, right? And then you have Sony, which makes way more than just games, and they're only at a little more than double that total. And then, Microsoft is leagues above both of them. They tons and tons and tons and tons of money for Microsoft, okay? So what is Sega at? Now, Sega is not on macro trends, so I have to go off of Statista's data. It might not... I don't know if they have different methodologies and they would get different numbers for Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. So, if you want to put an asterisk by this is fine, but I don't think it would be that big of a difference as far as the proportion goes, okay? I also have to point out this is technically going off of Sega Sammy, and that's the holding company that owns Sega. And it owns a bunch of other businesses too. They own TMS, which is an anime company. They own pachinko companies. They own resorts. So this number that I'm going to cite here is also for a lot of other businesses than just Sega. But as far as Statista says, the annual operating income for Sega in 2022 was 32 billion yen, which as of today's value in US dollars is $229,289,600. So not $289 billion, $289 million with an M, which is a significant drop from $5.2 billion. So I'm just saying, approximately $230 million compared to Nintendo's $5.276 billion. I mean, I guess I don't know how much goes into R&D and manufacturing and marketing and all that stuff, but I'm just saying, if the business with the lowest operating income is a whole nother digit, is a whole nother like letter type, again, billion versus million, I'm just fairly confident in the idea that Sega is not going to ever have the money again to do any kind of consoles. Okay, they're gonna third-party develop games, and maybe they'll make the occasional retro mini console like they did with the Genesis Mini and the Game Gear Micros, right? And that's okay. I'm not saying that I would not be happy if Sega could do this again. It's just the business reality suggests that they're never going to do this again. And, you know, the arguments in favor of that, of them making a new console, they cannot match up to the business realities. It is pretty much what it is. So, you know, it's unfortunate, but I don't think that's going to be changing. But that is all that I have to say. We are finally at the end of today's episode. Please, folks, do all of your typical engagement things, depending on your platform. I would really love to get a voicemail. If you haven't sent me a voicemail, consider sending me a voicemail, and it might be featured on this show. Otherwise, like this stuff. Give me a subscription. Do whatever you want to do. Leave a comment. I like seeing folks comment. But I look forward to seeing you all in the next episode. This is Brandon Pudwell for the Creative Outlet Podcast, signing out.